Okay, welcome back to Faith in Question. Again, I'm your host, Rob, and I've got Dylan here with me for another episode of the 6-month Christian versus the 6-month skeptic. You guys have seen this before, and so we'll dive right into it today. We wanted to start this discussion going back to the story of Joseph being sold into Egypt, and then we'll talk a little bit more, Dylan, right after that into some of the events that happened later on as the Israelites were leaving Egypt. So we're going to spend, I guess, the majority of this time in Genesis, Exodus, that kind of area, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Let me get this queued up, and we'll start with a clip from my video about the story of Joseph and the contradiction that we see in the Bible between the Midianites and the Ishmaelites and Joseph and his brothers selling Joseph into Egypt. So let's start there. I'm going to get this live. And let's go play. What is going on? How can they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, but then they have him back to sell him to Potiphar in Egypt into slavery? That doesn't make any sense. And to make matters worse, if we look a couple chapters ahead in the Bible, chapter 39 and verse 1, it says, "And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him off the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither." So the Bible can't make up its mind. Who is actually selling Joseph into Egypt? At this point, one thing is very clear. It was not his brothers, but there are two different groups, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites, and the Bible keeps flip-flopping back and forth on which one pulled him out of the pit, sold him, and then sold him into Egypt. These are very clearly different accounts and different people. Perfect. Okay. So, yeah, that's just one of the clips from that passage. Now, I know you saw that video, and we chatted a little bit in the comments. So, fill folks in on your point of view on this contradiction. How do you deal with it?
Yeah. Well, when I read it, I thought the same thing. I had to look at another Bible. I have two different ones with me. One of them, it reads that the Ishmaelites lifted Joseph up from the well or the pit, and then the one that I read consistently, the New Language Translation. The other one is a English Standard Version. The New Language reads that the Ishmaelite traders were. Let me just pull it up.
Sure.
Maybe we can pull it up on the screen too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Genesis, what is it? Genesis 27? Is that what it was?
I think it's 30. I think it's 37. Yeah. But let's make sure.
Joseph sold into slavery. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As they approached, they made plans to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him. Let's throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. We'll see what comes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. "Let's not kill him," they said. "We should not shed any blood. Let's just throw him into the empty cistern in the wilderness, and then he'll die out in the land." Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph, returning to his father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off his beautiful robe that he was wearing. When they grabbed him, they threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, and there was no water in it. When they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and they saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming towards them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders. Now this is where your point comes in. Yep. Taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead, or however you say that, down to Egypt. They said, basically, let me scroll down a little bit. Let me go down a little bit. Instead of hurting them,
remind us which version you're reading right now?
I'm reading the NLT. And then if you see, you have the ESV, right, up there?
Yeah.
Keep that up there.
Okay.
So you can see the difference, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So, tore off his clothes. If you scroll down a little bit, so one says Midianite traders up there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then yours says, then it says Ishmaelite traders wherever they pull them up.
Yeah, here we go. So it's actually, then it's really the Midianites, right? So they see the Ishmaelites coming, right?
Yeah.
So let's read my verse 28 in the ESV, and then you can read yours in the NLT, and we'll see the difference here, right? So they see the Ishmaelites are coming. They're sitting down eating. They're saying, "Hey, let's kill him. Let's sell him off to Egypt. Let's make some money off him." But then the Bible introduces the Midianites. So verse 28, ESV, then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. So the way I'm reading this verse in the ESV is that another group of Midianites come by, they pull Joseph out of the pit while his brothers aren't looking, and they're the ones that sell him to the Ishmaelites, who then take him to Egypt. So let's go to your version and let's see what we're getting. You said it's the NLT, right? Maybe I have that.
NLT. It's in the New King James. It's very similar in the New King James.
New Living Translation.
Yep.
Okay, let's go down to verse 28 and go ahead and read it for us.
All right, so where's it at? So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. So when I read it for the first time with you, I was like, yeah, that's weird, right?
Yeah.
And then I read it in mine, and I was like, well, that's even more weird. They contradict each other. So I went to my good old friend ChatGPT, and I asked it, I compared these two verses first, and then I asked it, what does the Hebrew say, right? And like, what does each word mean in Hebrew? Mm-hmm. So it broke it down, and it broke it down really close to what the NLT said. So like when I was looking into this, it's like I guess the way that the Hebrew is worded, like it's when the subject of the sentence, right? So in this instance, it was mostly talking about what the brothers were going to do.
Yeah.
It kind of keeps that. So the they in that, in your version, the ESV, I'm just going to say your version for the sake of the argument.
Yeah.
Right? It uses they, meaning the brothers.
Yeah.
So I was like, why is this? And then I looked into it, and it was like, let's say if the subject switched to the Midianite or the Ishmaelite traders, it would be like, so it would say something like, and behold, switching the subject, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites pulled him out. So it's like a weird way the Bible is translated. That's what I got when I looked into it. So I just thought that was interesting.
It is interesting. And here's the other thing that I think is interesting, and I'll just stop sharing here, because that passage is fascinating. In the King James Version, right, and the ESV, you're getting it. The question is, who is that they, right? Mm-hmm. Is the they talking about the most recent noun that we saw, which was the Midianites, or is it going back to the previous verse and saying they is their brothers? And look, I don't know the answer to that. I think it's interesting, but here's the reason why. And this is one of the things we learned in school that I think you'll just enjoy hearing. It's so difficult to look at ancient Hebrew and actually translate it into what it means in English. Why? Two reasons. There's no vowels, just the consonants, right? They have, I think they have 22, That's 22 cool. letters in their alphabet. There's no vowels, and there's no punctuation. You don't know. Okay. You don't know if it's a pause. You don't know if it's a period, semicolon, comma, all these tools that we've invented so that you can properly interpret what someone is saying when they write it down. They don't have vowels and they don't have punctuation. So there was a lot of infighting amongst even the Hebrew scribes as to what this text actually was supposed to say, and it actually developed. I'm listening to I'm in a class right now about the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is really fascinating, but they actually explained how they would preserve their text. And I just find it interesting. They would write it down, right? So they had the written version with no vowels and no punctuation, and then they had on top of the writing, there was an oral tradition that went along with it. So these people were literally memorizing the Bible, and they memorized where are the pauses, where are the breaks, what is the actual meaning of this, because we don't have that for the text. And there were two different groups, one that had the written and one that had the oral, and they would actually bring that together in order to understand what this text actually said. It's fascinating stuff. And if you can get away from the argument between, about whether or not God inspired it and all that kind of stuff, you just kind of think about like how ancient people were trying to keep this text alive, and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
it makes sense why we struggle to know exactly what they meant.
Yeah, and then languages go dead too. So like, there's probably a bunch of stuff that we just can't even read today. You know, like I think on a podcast, Wes Huff was talking about that nobody can read Sumerian.
Yeah.
You know, and it's difficult to figure out what that says. Even Greek, because like they were saying that Hebrew and Greek, like they don't even really know if that's how the words were pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
They just kind of pronounce them this way so that they can speak it and kind of read it.
Yeah, look, there's I mean, in the last, I think, so we can now read the cuneiform, the Sumerian text. There are people who have actually been able to translate that, and the same with Egyptian hieroglyphs, right? In the last 150 years, we were able to start reading all the stuff that the Egyptians wrote down. And that's what's kind of, it's kind of changing the conversation that we're having about the Bible, because as we go into a lot of these ancient writings from Sumer, from the Hittite Empire, from Persia, from Babylon, we're finding a lot of stories, and they are very similar. They predate the Bible, but there's a lot of similarities to the Bible, which is kind of what I find so fascinating about these texts as we're interpreting them. Now, I can't read Assyrian, I can't read Sumerian, I can't read Egyptian, so I'm taking scholars' word for it. But I mean, have you looked into any of this stuff? Seen it as it's being interpreted?
I've looked into like there's stories that are similar. Like there's a lot of flood stories as well,
Mm-hmm.
which is very interesting too. And then I think like one of the newer hypotheses that have come out is like with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson that there was an ancient civilization that got wiped out by a flood.
Mm-hmm.
And where else do we see that? We see that in the Bible. So I think it's really interesting. I was looking into this yesterday. The dates don't really line up to the Bible of what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I was actually looking at that. I think what they're saying is an asteroid hit 13,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, if you look at the Bible, it's only been about 1,000 years from Adam to Noah.
Yeah.
So if Adam was created when they say it is, if their ages were correct, it was only 1,000 years. So
yeah, it should be about
also very
1500 years from Adam to Noah.
Oh yeah, 1600.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because
it's
like
just
if you
interesting stuff.
Yeah, like if you use the Bible dating, which if you believe the Bible is literal, I don't know how else you would do your dating. But not all Christians believe that the Bible is literal at that time. But yeah, you end up somewhere around 2350 BC, 2500 BC to 2350 BC, somewhere in there. So like 45 to 4600 years ago that this flood would have happened. It does not line up with the global cataclysm that you see in Graham Hancock and Ancient Apocalypse talking about. But I find it fascinating nonetheless because, you know, this isn't necessarily Bible related, but I think it is when we think about trying to figure out whether or not the Bible is that single source of truth. Is it the true origin of our world and our species? You know, traveling around the world and seeing these ancient structures like the pyramids in Egypt, and
that's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe in Turkey, like these crazy underground cities. And it's like, how did these ancient people build stuff that we could barely build today with all of our technology? And like, you struggle to try to explain it. It doesn't really make sense.
Right there with you, yeah.
You know, so when you look at the Bible and you see stuff like this, are you looking at the passages in the Bible, like in Genesis 6 when it says there were giants in the land, and you're like, oh yeah, I can explain that, no problem. Giants built this stuff.
Well, it's interesting because it uses the phrase Nephilim, right? And then also, like, if you look in the book of Job, like the fathers of the Nephilim were the men of renown, the sons of God, right? Is that what it says, right? And in Job, it also refers to them. So, and then I think in the book of Jude in the New Testament, I think that's right. It also refers to them sleeping with regular women, forming these like spiritual beings, right? The Nephilim. And I don't know. I just think it's really interesting. And then you have the Book of Enoch, which is not scripture at all, and it's nowhere near the dating of when actual Enoch would be there, but it's kind of cool to look at if you can take it as like that's a myth,
Yeah.
like, kind of like the lore of the Bible. Maybe it's not completely true, but it's
Well, you know,
interesting.
I would put Job in that category as well. Scholars have been arguing about this for years, but nobody can figure out when Job was supposed to have existed.
Yeah,
None of the names match up. The locations don't match up. That we don't know when this is supposed to be, and it's almost like this is a fable, you know?
yeah,
Like they use it to tell a story. Somehow that made it into the canon of the Bible, while books like Enoch did not, right? But again, when you know see
it may have been previously. It is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Like
Enoch,
the Enoch.
yeah, so like the Dead Sea Scrolls are not, they were not all found together. They were found in the same region in a
Yeah,
bunch of
okay,
different caves. So there's something like 900 manuscripts that they found with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Only about a quarter of them are the biblical text that we
got it.
have today. Now, it is true also that of the 39 Old Testament books, 38 of them were found with the Dead Sea Scrolls. The only book that's missing is the Book of Esther. And there's
Yeah,
a number of
is
reasons for
Genesis
that.
missing too? Because
No, well,
I was looking at it in the like on the website, and
yeah.
most of Genesis is gone, like just eroded away.
Yeah, let me be very clear. The only Old Testament book that they have a almost full manuscript of is Isaiah. We have
Yeah,
two copies of Isaiah, the Great Isaiah Scroll, and the other one I can't remember. Those are the only books that we have a full copy of. Everything else, we have multiple copies of fragments, right? And some of the fragments are longer fragments and some of them are just a couple of words, right? But we have 900 different documents, 230 or so of which are actual biblical text. So the only text missing is from the entire collection is the Book of Esther, but you know, there are also other books there that didn't make it into the canon, like the Book of Enoch, which is
yeah, which is a
very
very
interesting.
interesting book if anybody's ever read. I've read like First Enoch, most of it.
Yeah,
So
I would encourage Christians or anyone who's thinking about this stuff to go and read Enoch because, boy, is that an interesting read.
yeah,
And it talks about the giants. It talks about the Nephilim, right? It talks about the like just the absolute chaos of the earth at that time, but also how it's not so different from if you have ever watched like Ancient Aliens or something, and they're always talking
yeah,
about like these ancient gods came down, they gave us technology, they taught us how to do things. That's
yeah,
basically what the Book of Enoch says,
and it
right?
fits it into Genesis 6.
Yeah,
So like the fallen angels came down and taught us how to make weapons and
yeah,
gave us makeup and basically aided in our fall away from God. It's just very interesting. And then if you look at that Randall Carlson Graham Hancock theory and you kind of fudge the numbers a little bit in Genesis, you can kind of see maybe there was an Adam and an Eve or whatever, and then fall of man was a great global civilization. Everybody is just evil, right? Everybody's sinners anyways.
yeah,
And maybe they built the pyramids. Maybe they built these other structures. They're worshiping false gods. And it just got so bad. God sent that cataclysm, flooded the whole earth. You know? It's interesting stuff to
yeah.
think about. I've been
Now
trying to make sense of it myself. So
yeah. Now I'm not a flood believer, right?
yeah, I've heard about that. But
Okay,
if you look at that Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson theory, and somehow I know the numbers in Genesis don't line up,
right.
but you could kind of fit that story in there if somehow you fudge the ages of the people. Let's say like in Sumeria they were living 10,000 years. The great kings
Mm-hmm.
were 1,000 years. So if they're living
Yeah,
that long, and that's a long time for people to be having kids in, that could very easily become a global civilization
yeah,
building crazy stuff. I
yeah.
just think it's a fun conspiracy thing.
No, look, it is 100%. I enjoy thinking about these things, but the point you're making about like, yeah, can you fit that theory into the biblical text? Sure, but you can fit that theory into any of the flood myths, right?
Yeah.
Like, honestly, any of them could work with that narrative. And quite frankly, many of these flood myths are far older than 2500 BC, which would allow for a lot of the stuff we see today. Like one of my biggest problems with the flood that, and I made a video about this a while back.
I think I've seen it.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of your videos in a short amount of time, so it's kind of
Okay, well, that's fine. I'm glad you're helping the algorithm, so we appreciate that. But I laid out 5 scientific reasons why the flood likely didn't happen, and Christians lined up to just smack them down one at a time in the comments. It was like I was like my second video I posted, and there were like 500 comments on it, right? So I'm like, oh geez, like this is gonna be fun. But there was one of the evidences that nobody touched. No one would touch it because most of the people who believe in the flood are biblical literalists, right? Which means you have to believe in a 6,000-year-old Earth. Because once you no longer are reading the Bible literally, then there doesn't have to be a real flood. It could just be an allegory or a story, right? So if you want to have a real flood, you have to take the years literally as well, and you get a 6,000-year-old Earth. So the question I ask people is, how do you deal with the fact that there were multiple civilizations in multiple areas of the Earth that existed before the flood, during the flood, and after the flood? We have written evidence of these cultures before, during, and after, and it seems like nobody told them they were supposed to get wiped out in 2500 BC. So you got the Egyptians, you have the Sumerians, you have the modern-day Pakistan and the ancient Indus Valley, you have the Chinese as well. 4 different civilizations, 4 different cultures that we know of that had written histories that go back there. Now, I'm not getting the vibe from you that you're a 100% biblical literalist, but you could change my mind. So where do you stand with this kind of stuff?
I think a flood probably did happen in the past. I don't know if the dating would match up with the Bible, though. I've been looking into it. I don't know. That's the thing. I'm so new into this. I'm trying to figure this out for myself. So, but before I came to faith, I was watching, all those Joe Rogan podcasts with Jimmy Corsetti, Randall Carlson, all this stuff, and they're bringing some, and then that ancient civilization thing that's on Netflix that Graham Hancock made.
Yeah, Ancient Apocalypse.
Evidence. Yeah, you see the evidence that there probably was a civilization before. So, and it also, there's civilization before in the Bible. So it kind of fits. I don't know. That's a very long time ago. So I don't know how that would fit in there. But for me, the big thing is the resurrection of Jesus. That's what I put my faith in, because I think that actually happened. So if like you look at the Dead Sea Scroll, Genesis is missing, things go away. Nothing lasts forever. So, but if Jesus really did come down and die for us, to me that makes sense. Like I can't figure out how to disprove that. Like I've never heard that theory that Jesus was never put in a tomb. I'll have to look into it, but I've watched countless videos. I've been reading stuff. I've never heard that theory. So something to think about.
Well, it's one of the things that we didn't talk about in the last video, but we were wrapping up that last episode. You were making the point that one of the reasons why you believe, and I've heard this before, is that the disciples, like, they chose to die for this faith, right? And
according to church history,
and I think it's William Lane Craig, who famously has been presenting for years the same argument that nobody dies for something that they know is false, right?
So, I've heard that.
So there's some belief there based on that the disciples believed that he was risen, that he rose from the dead, like he said. But there's a number of ways people can be convinced of things, right? I think about the before we were both born, but 1978, the Jim Jones cult. Over 900 people moved down to Guyana, South America, and that's where we get the phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" from, because they all killed themselves by drinking cyanide-laced drink that in order to fulfill their prophecy and make a point and get a bunch of attention, right? They all died for a cause. But I guess the point I would make there is just because you die for a cause you believe in doesn't make it true. these people in Guyana were duped into dying for this cause. And they
Yeah,
killed themselves.
they didn't know it was false though. They probably really believed
No,
whatever.
exactly. I'm with you. We agree there. People who join cults typically are convinced that that is the
Yeah,
truth. What I'm
100%.
saying is, what's the difference between someone who joins a cult that we all know is stupid and the disciples dying for a cause? What's the difference? If you die anyway, believing something that's true or not true, in this case of the Jim Jones cult, like, why could it also not be true that the disciples died for something that they thought was true but turned out not to be?
Yeah. Well, if that's the thing is that they would have had to. They claimed to see dead Jesus, right? These Guyana people, they just thought. I don't know what they believe, but probably drinking the Kool-Aid was going to give them superpowers or something. You know, they couldn't prove that was false, but like if these disciples are like, hey, I know I've seen this man. He rose from the dead. He healed people. He brought people back to life. I can see how somebody would die for that. You know, especially if you're 100% convinced that is the Son of God, that is God, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would die for God, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and you brought up the point earlier where we don't even know if the disciples actually died for this, but that is the church tradition, right?
Yeah.
So we
But
have
we know
that.
Stephen in the Book of Acts died for it.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely. There was a couple of other disciples that we know of who died. John.
John, I think, was the only one that died of old age. I think,
Yeah,
as
but he
according to
was.
church tradition. I think Peter was crucified upside down. John was thrown into a boiling pit of oil, but I don't.
Or,
I've heard too that he's thrown in a boiling pit of oil and then he died of old age. So
yeah, they tried to
they
kill him.
both happened.
He died in exile on the Isle of Patmos.
Yeah, I think
So
Paul was stoned, right?
yes,
For like
yes.
they finally got him after his missionary
Although
was
I
over.
actually, and it's funny because I've read the Bible so many times, I can't remember how Paul actually dies. He was stoned 3 times and didn't die.
Yeah,
Uh,
and there, a bunch of Paul's story is insane.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
really crazy. It's cool stuff.
Well,
But
the interesting thing to me about Paul, because like similarly to the disciples claimed that they had seen God, and then you had Paul claim that he had seen God, right, on the road to Damascus,
hmm
and there were other people there, and they heard the voice, but they didn't see the
yeah, I've
light,
heard this.
right? And then like later on, Paul changes his mind, and it's the opposite, and then he goes back and forth on it, and it's like,
Yeah. Well, I think the explanation that I saw is that that's like a translation thing, that those words in Greek mean very similar things, like seeing and hearing.
okay,
So, but I'm not an expert in Greek, so I guess I'll just concede on that point. Yes, it does contradict in the
yeah,
English text. So,
yeah. So what do you when you look at the Bible then, like, because we've talked a lot in these few episodes about errors, contradictions, things that we see there. Like, what is your belief? I know you mentioned like, look, there could be problems, but I believe in the resurrection. That's enough for me. But when you look at the Bible, is this the word of God? Is this authored by God? Is it inspired by God through men? Like, how do you look at the Bible when you read it? What's your actual belief about the book?
it's probably inspired. It's inspired by God, but also, like at a certain point, humans do make errors. Like in the Gospels, like there are things that they line up, but they necessarily don't say the same thing. You know, so like
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, it's written by people who were inspired by God. So like obviously, some things in the Bible are not meant to be taken literal, and some things are. So
Yeah.
I'm not educated enough in this yet. I hope to be one day, and I'm not an apologist at all. So I'm not good at forming arguments and stuff like that.
Well,
So I just
you've
a lot of
been an
videos.
apologist on these episodes, so we'll give you that.
Yeah, I'm trying here, but I'm still new to all this. So,
Yeah. Look,
but
I like that we can have a civil discussion talking about these things because look, what I found in I've only been posting for a few months, right, on YouTube. and I post on Instagram a little bit too.
Hmm.
But when you get into conversations like these, people are so emotionally triggered by someone saying something that messes with what their worldview currently is.
Yeah, that's everywhere.
That,
So
yeah, but
it's
oh,
human nature.
absolutely.
Like you can
Certainly,
see it in Islam, you can see it in the Mormon, you could see it in
oh yeah, but
just
it's around
even
specific
nowadays.
things, right? It's there's a tribalism that's related to religion, to politics, to these different areas where for some reason these things trigger us in a way that, like, you read the comments on my post, like you just get these ad hominem attacks that are just like, yeah, you're an idiot, like you loser, whatever,
Hmm.
like, or you're gonna burn in hell. I get a bunch of those. um but I don't like I don't understand why we can't come to the conclusion that there is some nuance here, right? You make points, and I say, okay, look, I can see that. I disagree, but I could see why you say that. When we get on a call like this, we can have a fruitful discussion. I'm not convinced that what's happening online in the comment section of my videos is actually fruitful.
No, I don't think online. I think
Yeah,
it can be used for good and evil. I think that's with everything. And we
yeah,
can probably agree that there is 100% good and evil in this world to some point. So
yeah,
people get corrupted by that, and like I think that what's important with especially the New Testament, like the fruits of the Spirit, right? Like if you do live like Christ, it works. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, look, I think that there's a lot of good that religion does for people, and I won't deny that. I think there's some who do. And again, like, I think there's room for some nuance here. Religion has helped a lot of people to be able to cope with, the uncertainties in life around death, around suffering, things that we can't understand and explain, a purpose for why we're here, right? Like,
hmm
religion solves those things for people. My problem with religion really stems from the fact that we live in a world where, like, bad people have been doing bad stuff for a long time. That just goes back. We have stories of it going back as far as long as mankind has been here. But religion to me seems to be, and especially Christianity, the Abrahamic religions, right? Christianity, Islam, Judaism, those religions, even though bad people have been doing bad stuff the entire time, it's religion that causes good people to do bad things in the name of future good. And that's what I can't wrap my head around.
I
Is,
see. I see. That's to your point earlier, right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, think of the Crusades, think of, like, not even just
Yeah.
stuff in the Bible, but just the amount of killing that goes on in this world because people can't agree
Middle
on
East right now.
a religion,
You know.
you know? And that's where, I struggle when I think about, like, is religion a net positive? I want to say yes, but man, there's so many bad things that happen because of religion too.
But even if you don't subscribe to a religion, you still have a religion. Everybody has their own form of beliefs. Like before this, I was always thinking like there's got to be something. I just don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But here it gives you it gives you an understanding of where morals actually come from. Because without a God that tells you what is right and wrong, you can do whatever you want. And we see
Yeah,
it today. People are doing things that people 100 years ago would be absolutely horrified by. And then they probably would say the same thing about the generation before. And so it, I don't know. I don't think morality is subjective though. I think we'd like to think it is, but I don't think it is. If you get what I'm saying, because like if you get into the weeds and all this, like there's a lot of
mm-hmm.
debate online right now. Like people are very divided and stuff like that, and I think that comes from a godless society. So I think it could bring a lot of good. But then you also say the Crusades, right? You have the Christians came and pushed the Muslims out,
Yeah,
like almost like because that's what happened to them, right? So
yeah.
I don't know this whole like
There's a
it's been going on forever. That's
there,
human nature. We fight against each other.
there's a movie, I can't remember what it's called, I forget but it's just the famous line that ever since there's been a God, there's been killing in his name, right?
Hmm.
And but again, like I'll go back to what I just said a moment ago. I can't discount all the good. Like by and large, in the United States of America, I see Christians trying to do good, to try to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And
It's like this whole country's founded on Judeo-Christian values, that
yeah,
you don't get. We get freedoms in America that you don't get other sides of the world just because of that. So it's just interesting to think about. So
yeah, no, 100%, 100%. Well, this has been a fun conversation. I think let's wrap this one up. This will
cool.
be our third episode that we've
Perfect.
done. The 6-month Christian versus the 6-month skeptic. I really enjoyed this. I want to
Me too,
know
man.
what folks think about this in the comments, though, right? Let us know if this is a format that you've enjoyed. Do you want to see more of this? Should Dylan and I make this a regular thing as we both continue to learn more and learn together and challenge each other on our faith? And you all can join along and learn with us. So I'm
Cool.
excited to do that. We'll wrap this one up, but any last words before we part ways, Dylan?
No, I just want to thank you for this. I think this conversation has been fruitful, and I would be down to do more. So it'd
Yeah.
also be cool to maybe see other people, their perspectives. I see
Yeah.
a lot of stuff online where people do like live streams, some fruitful, some not so fruitful.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
get other
Yeah.
people's opinions in there.
Okay, then let us know in the comments if you think a live stream would be a good idea, and we can get started with something. I don't really care who's in the audience, right? Who's showing up for it. If we have interesting people to talk to and talk about, I'm all for it. And I know there are more people who would be interested in joining this discussion. So reach out to me in the contact section of the Faith in Question page. Let us know you're interested in it, and let's get 4 or 5 people around the table and talk about these issues. Get some other perspectives in here. Our only rule is we keep it civil, right? We're respectful as we do this. That's what we're looking to do here. But we want to keep learning together. So with that, another episode of Faith in Question. We'll see you guys next time.